Hello and welcome to Beyond Our Patterns, a podcast in which we navigate the journey of breaking free from personal patterns and improving communication skills. We're your hosts, Claudia
and Vlad. Here, we'll be having candid discussions about personal development, communication, and ways of relating, romantically and otherwise.
Alright, so the topic of today's podcast is container-based conversations. We thought it was a really great thing to jump into right after discussing why poly, because honestly, without container-based conversations, I don't think we would be where we are. It is one of the core tools in our assortment of relationship toolkits, and it's actually pretty cool once you get into it.
Yeah, and I think at this point, I've integrated it into quite a few of my non-romantic relationships, whether it's in work, whether it's friendships. And when you say we wouldn't be where we are, I think we just wouldn't be a thing. We might not be in each other's lives if not for that. And throughout this episode, we will kind of intersperse it with little bits of our story, and we'll actually delve into probably the toughest moment in our relationship, which really was a make or break incident, let's call it that, and actually salvage the relationship. So stay tuned, there'll be some juicy bits.
Awesome. So let's jump straight in. So what is it? What is this magical container-based conversation that saved a relationship? Well, it's basically a conversation that allows you to focus on a difficult topic that requires dedicated space, time, and emotional availability. It is underpinned by the willingness of you to show up for the relationship. The way we structure container-based conversations is usually in 3 parts. You have a bit of a pre-conversation or a meta-conversation where you agree on the structure of the container. So what will make you feel safe? What do you require throughout? Are you going to have some ways to tap in or tap out of the conversation if things get too much?
Kind of rules of engagement of sorts.
Yeah, exactly.
I know you hate the word rules in this, but I kind of like it.
That's okay. We'll go with rules. Then you have the body or the container itself, where you show up and discuss the conversation, the topic at hand. Mm-hmm. And what's really important in that moment is that you show up with presence and that you respect each other's perspectives. So you're there to hear and listen and witness and allow the other to share vulnerably. Mm-hmm. And what's really important at the end is the aftercare. So the idea of a container-based conversation is that you come to a resolution that ultimately brings you closer together if the topic is about you, or brings you closer to a conclusion of a difficult topic that you were working through yourself with the help of your partner.
And I think, to add here, there's a concept of avoiding conflict in, I think, the subconscious of a lot of people in terms of relationships. And what the container-based conversation allowed me to do is actually create connection through conflict, which is the name of a course of a couple different people. But it's really focusing on that repair at the end. And because you know that that's your intention, you're actually able to bring up things that are really deep and honest and maybe unpleasant and maybe hard to deal with. But you're not treating it as like, oh, this is, we're throwing these things at each other and it's going to lead to rupture, but more of like, we're throwing these things out because that's the only way we see to actually continue and find common ground and then find repair and resolution towards the end.
Absolutely. And I think what's also important in the concept of a container is that it's a space you can really bring yourself to and you can really bring up the topic to. I think sometimes it's hard to find a moment in your life, in the relationship, to come with whatever worry you might be facing and feel comfortable and confident that you will be heard and you will be received. So I think the container is really that moment to bring that in. And then you have the repair, as you said.
Yeah. And on that note, so we also interchangeably call it container or holding space. And we use it really frequently in our relationship where we're like, hey, I don't think this is something to discuss right now. Let's have a separate container for this. And maybe jumping into that, the first part, which is, we call it the meta conversation, is where you pre-agree what exactly this container will look like. And we've only had one of these, and we've set out the rules, and we still have that note which we wrote out together. We'll delve into it just in a second, how that came about. But basically, it is writing out what are the core principles that you want to keep in mind. And so, for us at the time, we had a month apart. Our emotions were running super high. We had a lot of conflicts going on, and we were like, okay, when we get back, we need to talk. And the talk was not like a little talk. It was, we both acknowledged that it's gonna basically
make or break it.
Exactly. We're either gonna stay together or it's not gonna work. And we both acknowledged the fact that the emotions were running so high. We need to figure out a way of like, how do we structure this in a way where we don't either run away or throw things at each other, And we actually had a phone call just to, we were at a point where we were like struggling to have a phone call because we either had to pretend that everything's fine, or as soon as we delved into things, we couldn't manage them. So we're like, okay, let's just have a phone call before we're in person to decide like, how are we going to have this conversation? And so we wrote out this note on the go, on the phone, and we called it the meta conversation. And I actually have 4 things from that conversation that we wrote out. And I think that's a really key thing. Beyond the actual rules, which we'll go into in a second, there's the whole intention of like, what is it? Why are you having this container-based conversation in the first place? And so for us, the main intention was prioritizing our connection to each other and doing everything we can to show up with kindness, self-awareness, openness, to really hear each other and be present for the other person, and then be completely authentic all the way through, right? And then I actually asked for reassurance that, look, if we're having this conversation, we're having it because we're still not giving up on this relationship. We're committed to the process of working through it, and we're looking for ways to make it work as opposed to reasons to break it. And so it was really important for us to align on that. We did it both during the discussion of the kind of whole meta conversation as we were structuring it, but also we reread these in the beginning of our container conversation. A really core component that I've learned through some past relationships and have heard in different places is also the we perspective versus the you versus I. So it's kind of like we versus the problem, as opposed to you did this, I did this. And so another thing was making sure that we stick to that and be like, how do we stay in the we? And then the last one, we create a little bit of structure of one person starts sharing, and then they have an uninterrupted time of X amount of minutes to fully share, provide all the context that they need to provide, share all the emotions, and then the other person can either validate it or just listen quietly, but there's no rebuttal. There's no like, you're talking about how you were in pain, but I was in pain. And it's like, no, you'll have your time to share. There's no expectation that it's one-sided, but then make sure that when one person shares, it's really for them, and you're really empathizing, you're really showing up for them, you're really trying to put yourself in their shoes and understand. And then we swap. And this way people can lay out kind of the landscape, how it was for them. We can have some sort of, one person shares, and then we kind of stay on that and then go back and forth, and then we swap. And so, yeah, we actually wrote it out, and we still have that note. We haven't really had to go back to it because I think we really took the rules very seriously, that now they're kind of ingrained in our heads. So it's a very obvious thing, but I think it's a really good start. And I think anyone in any relationship where you don't have a very clear way of resolving such conflicts, it's a really helpful little guideline to write out. And it will be different for everyone, but we will suggest a few things going forward.
Okay, so then, you have this meta conversation. We had it, I think, a day before we actually met to have our conversation, and then we got together on the day, and we're feeling a little stressed, and we're not sure how to go about it. And actually, this meta conversation set us up really well for the start, because we started with reminding ourselves the intention of the conversation, and then we have our time to share. So we each had a couple of minutes to bring out what's been happening for us, and it's been a long time. We haven't seen each other for a month.
A lot of poly things have happened in that time.
Yes, we had a lot to discuss, but I think what was really important in having that uninterrupted time to share is that you could bring out your entire context. You could bring out the entire story, and the person could not react to a single trigger point or a single moment where their perspective might have been different, and therefore interrupting your thought process. I think that was a really reassuring and sort of, safe space creating way of sharing, because there was a lot that accumulated.
Yeah.
And that just allowed also the other person to tune in and go into their empathetic listening mode,
And I think a big thing for us as well was just recognizing how much pain the other person was in, right? Because we really hurt each other in different ways. And I think both of us were really stuck in our own pain and failing to empathize. It was definitely made so much worse by the fact that we were kind of long distance for that month. But yeah, that container was like, oh wow, they're really going through it. And I was so focused on myself that I didn't recognize it. So it created such a beautiful opportunity to see the context of the other person, which then creates a very different setup for the conversation versus if we like delve straight into like, hey, you did this.
Exactly. And then what's also beautiful is afterwards you have that moment for repair and aftercare. So, there comes a point where your emotions are just exhausted. Like you're exhausted. Like it's been a conversation and you just want to hug. And what we actually realized is, this one conversation was not going to be enough. So we ended up creating a container week where we agreed to have 2 more conversations. The second one was going to be on Thursday, to kind of give ourselves time to process all the emotions, all the things that have been brought up, the perspectives that we were not aware of before. And then on Sunday, we were going to make a decision on how we actually will relate to each other going forward. And
so Monday through Sunday, that was a fun week.
That was an intense.
It was like a saga, honestly. I was telling it to my friends. They were like, I think my flatmate, who normally loves Turkish series, she was like, I don't think I'll watch anymore because your life is enough.
So essentially, having the reassurance that there will be all these containers that we need to continue the conversation also allowed us to take a break. And, at some point on Monday, be like, okay, this is enough. We've had enough. Let's now cuddle. Let's now just stay in each other's arms and remember the importance of our closeness and how safe we can really feel in each other's presence. Okay, so we have a couple of do's and don'ts for what you can really benefit with remembering about or what you can bring.
Take them with a grain of salt. It's just our perspective, but that's what's worked for us.
For the do's, we have how you show up, how you act, and how you stay connected. So, it's really important, and actually the whole point of this container is that you can show up authentically and with full honesty. Whether it's in sharing your perspective, whether it's in sharing feedback, whether it's in responding to your partner, it's so important that this is the space where you can really be honest. Because if you don't bring everything you have into this container, how can you trust that the other person will be honest, or that, there will be that honesty and trust in your relationship going forward? Spoiler alert, we have actually struggled with that a little bit ourselves and learned a lot from that. So we'll talk about that later. But it's also important, one of the precursors of holding this container is that you can show up with your emotional availability. And if the conversation drags on and it actually is really exhausting and draining, it's also important that you say you don't have space anymore. That is what happened to us. On Monday, we were like, at one point, this was so much that we need more time on a different day. We just needed to cap it and pause it. And it's important, that is part of showing up authentically, which is even to say, I don't have any more space. And, another thing that's really important is to follow the principles of nonviolent communication. So as we said, coming from the we, not from the I, trying to really stay connected and really keep that perspective in mind of like, what was your intention? What did you come to this conversation with? You ultimately want to resolve conflict and not create more conflict, right?
Yeah.
Another thing that's important is to acknowledge the other person's emotions and acknowledge your own feelings, hurts, whatever you're coming with. And in response, come with genuine curiosity. I think that's just been such a through line for our relationship, to keep coming back to the place of curiosity, keep coming back to asking the questions, asking, wanting to find out what is happening for the other person, what's happening for your partner, why are we here, and coming from that place of curiosity also unites you with your partner, because you're exploring something together. So anyway, all this goes back to, if you come authentically and if you really bring yourself, and if you keep in mind that this is a problem we want to solve together, then the conversation is more likely to go well.
100%. And to add a couple points to that, I think one is relating to what you were just saying about kind of coming with curiosity. A lot of it comes down to respect. Like, hopefully if you're with your partner, you respect them and you understand that, the reasons for their actions are there and they're valid. And a lot of it is like trying to understand them instead of dismissing them. And on that note, especially during our conversation, there were moments where I would get flooded with my own kind of like, but, okay, you felt it in pain, but you did this. And it's really important to make sure that you park that for a bit, and you can be like, you can make a note of it if you need to bring it up in the time when you have to share. But it's so important to make sure that you really try to understand the other partner. And sometimes it really sucks, because you're like, if you fully drop into it, you start feeling a lot of guilt and like, how could I be so ignorant of what they were feeling and make them feel so much pain? But it's really important for any kind of repair to really go there. And then the last piece is the earliest thing you mentioned about like really sharing fully. And there were, I think, quite a few moments, and again, we'll delve into it, where it was just so tempting to be like, I'll leave this little thing out. Like, and, we had a couple of big ones, but even on a really small level, in kind of very mundane, everyday container conversations, there's like, this thing feels a bit off. And it's so kind of unpleasant to bring it up, because you're like, I just really want to park it. But I think it's really important to come with all of that. And there's an element of trusting your partner that they have the space to hold it. Because if you don't, and you start kind of trying to minimize your own emotions, it's not going to go super well. So a lot of it is like trusting that there's the space for you to express, and then creating that and kind of reciprocating that. And so maybe on that note, the next piece is kind of how you act. And so one of it is, allowing certain rules to be there. So for us, one of the key things was allowing for breaks to happen. And if we needed to silence, or for example, like holding hands in silence, or maybe not holding each other. And, I've spent a few of these container conversations curled up in an embryo position, being like, I need to self-regulate here for a second. But then creating a way of doing that safely, so it doesn't feel like someone's just leaving the conversation. It's like, hey, I need to take a little break. Would that be okay?
Exactly. I think I, in the past, tended to struggle with the moment of overwhelm, and I just needed to take a moment. And because we pre-agreed that we can take a break, we can take a moment apart, and it doesn't mean that I'm leaving the conversation, or I'm removing myself, or I'm storming out. It really allowed a safer way of taking a break. And it's okay, Sometimes you will get overwhelmed and you just need a second to reground and come back into it better.
Yeah, 100%. And then the other bit is kind of, we briefly touched upon it, but it's really sharing the emotions vulnerably and allowing yourself to be witnessed. That was especially difficult, I think, for me, coming from a more, masculine frame, where, I don't know, I need to cry, or something like really, really touches on something deep. There were so many conversations where I felt like emasculated in some way, or somewhere where I felt really embarrassed and ashamed of my emotions. But if you don't let that happen, you rob your relationship from the opportunity to really be there for each other and witness. And so a lot of it is a lot of courage of like, let me trust that my partner can hold a space, but in that space I can take it up and really show my true emotions, like really what's coming up. And that actually allows them to, if they have the empathy, then seeing that allows them to really kind of drop into that space of empathy. And on that note, the last bit is really bringing the empathy when your other partner is sharing. So really coming from this place of, I don't know anything. That other person has a whole universe of their own experience, and I'm here to understand it. So almost this kind of observer mindset of, let me not bring any of my own prejudice of like, oh, you've done this and you've done that and I've done this, so I can expect what that made you feel, and being like, I really don't know. Please explain to me. Like almost like I'm a kid. I have no idea what happened. I really want to understand. And kind of coming from that blank slate, really trying to get the other person really helps. And there were definitely moments where something really clicked for me, where I was like, oh wow, that's how that's how you felt. I thought it was completely different. And so coupling those two on the opposite ends is super I think helpful. And then the last bit is how you actually stay connected. And so we talked about physical connection, that we would like at some points to hold hands and just feel in presence of each other, but we could also turn that back and be like, actually, I want to not touch right now.
Yeah.
So creating, yeah.
Actually, to make this one more specific, I think it was interesting because the physical connection was a bit point of contention, right? Like you needed the physical connection to stay connected, and I was saying, well, when I'm in this mode of feeling all the feels and the hurts, I don't want to touch you. I don't want to be touched, right? So it was a really interesting. I think actually I benefited a lot from your perspective, asking, can we connect sometimes? Can we reground by giving each other a hug or holding hands? I think that actually brought me back.
Yeah.
To our connection and reminded me, we're here to fix it and solve it. I don't want to sound like I was like out there raging and like I wasn't.
You were a little bit.
But
And on that note, these conversations are so much better in person. I think it's fair to say we still haven't fully figured out how to have them remotely.
Yeah.
Because it's just so hard to make sure that it's, and I mean, the one thing that really helps when you need is video, but if it's just voice, like it's tough. And so having the physical connection, having the body language, the warmth, just the feeling of the other person's body really helps to establish a connection that sometimes is at a deeper level than what you're talking about with words. I think another thing is reminding the vision that you've outlined in the meta conversation. So kind of having a moment of little time out, like, hey, can we reassure each other that we're in this to bridge our differences, as opposed to like use them to break apart, because there are moments where emotions run really high and you're a bit like, ooh, where is this going? And so again, having established the rules in the beginning that you can, tap out and be like, hey, can we reread what we said? Can we go back to the we perspective? Can we go back to the intention of, we're here to solve things, we're here to resolve this problem, we're here to repair, can be really helpful. And then lastly, it's, I think, really validating each other's experiences. So beyond sharing and then kind of basic acknowledging, being like, hey, here, and I mean, these are very basic principles of communication, right? But it's almost like repeating back to the other person, like, here's what I heard, here's what I understood, is that right? And really make the other person feel seen and heard. And that way, at the end of the sharings, you can kind of come together, as opposed to being like, okay, now you're done with sharing, let me jump in and share mine, and kind of accumulate more hurt, as opposed to being like, no, let me first really say how connected I feel. And like, I think when you shared that week, I just realized how much pain I put you through, or how much pain you were in due to other situations, and how I've like escalated that pain instead of alleviating it. And a lot of it was like really difficult for me, because I was like, oh my God, I made it so much worse. And I think, just acknowledging that was super important.
Yeah.
We've got a couple don'ts. Do you want to go through those?
Yeah, let's jump into the don'ts. So first of all, the don'ts kind of summarize the do's in some way or uphold that space better. So don't expect the space to be granted immediately on request. Like the point of the container conversation is that it happens when both of you have space. So when you ask, hey, I have something to bring up, I would really love a container for that. Can we do this right now? Don't expect that the answer is yes, of course. You actually might not want the person to say, yes, of course, let's do it right now, because you really want to make sure that when you do sit down to it, there is time, space, and emotional availability. And then, simultaneously, don't drop out of the conversation unexpectedly. We said show up authentically, communicate if you don't have the space anymore, but don't do the thing where you just stand up and go and you say this is it. So next we have no interrupting, shouting, stonewalling, blaming, any of those. Basically just keeping in mind that you want to show up with curiosity, show up with kindness. Don't weaponize the experiences shared in the conversation or any previous experiences against your partner. This is meant to be a safe space where you're working towards a resolution together and not fighting against each other. I think it's, as we said, going back to that we perspective.
And just briefly on the weaponizing bit, I've learned that from Relationship Theory by Tom and Lisa Bilyeu, which is a great relationship podcast as well. They were saying about weaponizing. I think that goes beyond one container, between containers. You can't have a container conversation, share something really vulnerable, and then in the next little argument you have you use the little insecurity that the person shared or something really deep and vulnerable against them as a way of manipulating them or as a way of making them feel bad. So one of the rules I was really trying to enforce is we can never weaponize what we share here. This is really vulnerable, and if we were to do so, that would really break the trust at a very deep fundamental level. So there's kind of a responsibility you take on of, what happens here stays here firstly, but also what happens here, we receive that with kindness and not as a way of then using it against the person to get what we need.
Absolutely. And, in relation to that also, you don't want to leave anything unsaid. You want to trust that the things that will be brought up won't be used against you, but then also bring up everything that needs to be brought up. And again, we will in just a moment describe to you what happened and how it came back to bite us when we didn't bring everything. But it's really, really important to precisely build that trust and honest communication. And finally, don't try to fix the other person. Don't try to come to the rescue. For example, when the person is sharing, leave them that space to share. Leave them that space to cry, to bring out all the emotions. I think it's really important. Sometimes we have this impulse to immediately come and grab and be like, it's going to be okay, we're going to fix it. Yes, we are. We're here to talk about that. But that's why it's important that you fix it together over time by mutually hearing, acknowledging, validating, rather than, jumping straight to it and apologizing prematurely or...
Yeah, and I think, for example, I have a huge problem with that where I try to fix, and oftentimes fixing feels like actually diminishing, right? So you're sharing an emotion really vulnerably, and then the other person tries to make it feel better, but actually it feels like they're invalidating what you're feeling. Simultaneously with that, it's kind of being ready for emotions to come up and being ready to witness them. So in our conversation, I think at some point I shared something and you're like, I don't really care. And I was like, is that really true? Or is that a surface level cover up? And then you're like, actually, I'm fucking pissed off with you. Fuck you. And I was like, oh, I wasn't ready for this, but now I got to witness this. So, I think you tend to want to rescue when the person's crying, less when they're wanting to kill you. But yeah, it's really letting those emotions be there and being like, I hear you. You're angry or you're sad. That's okay. We're gonna try to figure it out, but also I'm just here to receive this.
Yeah. Okay, I think we've alluded to our story quite a lot. Do you want to...
Feel free to skip over if you're not interested. We'll have a couple useful points towards the end, but
Come on, this is a juicy bit.
this is a juicy bit. Hopefully people are here for it. Let's see. But basically, yeah, we were away for a month, and a lot of poly things came up. And so it felt like I wasn't there to support Claudia in certain like really important moments. I felt in a lot of pain, and we kind of exchanged these like, oh, I need to hold space for the other person, and then not feeling like the space was held. And then that escalated into us kind of stonewalling quite a lot from each other. And then we decided to have that fateful conversation on Monday. And we basically started bringing up all the things that hurt us. I brought up something that was really new and intense, like a poly situation, which was really hard. And then we really thought that we'd be able to kind of close things on Monday, but actually we kind of reopened quite a few things. And then we were like, okay, we can manage this. Let's hug it out. So we paused it. We decided to continue it later. We actually decided to continue it on Sunday, and then we realized that's too far away. Let's have another meeting on Thursday, but still not have to make any decisions. And then on Thursday, we had this really hard conversation and this beautiful repair moment. And we're looking at each other's eyes, and it was like, we're back. And then the real honesty bit came up, which is there was, again, as part of a poly experience, there was a boundary that I crossed. And I was like, I cannot possibly leave things here where we've just repaired, because if I bring it up later, then it will disvalidate everything we've just done. So it's like in a Steve Jobs fashion, and there's one more thing. And then when I brought that up, let's just say things really escalated very quickly. So Claudia had to like tap out, leave. And then when she came back to the room, I remember I was sitting on the bed, and she kind of came, started packing her bag. She was like, I'm out. And I was like, please, like, let me in. Don't block me out. And she was like, well, okay, what do you have to tell me? And I was like, oh no. And at that moment, it really, and she was like, okay, see you Sunday morning. And we were planning to spend the whole day on Sunday. So I was like, this is going to be a Sunday morning. Hey, we're done. And then that's it. And there was a real moment for me where I was like, wow, I lost her. Like, that's it. We're done. And I was just at a complete loss of words. I didn't really know what to say. And I was just sitting on the bed with my head in my hands, being like, what have we done? And just this realization of just 5 minutes ago, we had this beautiful moment of repair, and we were about to salvage everything, and now everything's broken. But simultaneously, I was like, I could not have shared this, because this is the honest truth. And then I'm about to pass the mic over to Claudia, but there was a moment where I was just sitting there, and she got up, and because I was sitting on the edge of the bed, and she got up and sat behind me and kind of hugged me from behind.
Okay, stop stealing my thunder.
And I was like, what is going on?
Yeah, so basically from my perspective, at the moment when Vlad is like, there's one more thing, and then he proceeds to drop this bomb on me of like we had very few hard boundaries in our relationship.
And that boundary was set up by me.
Yeah, that was a boundary that he specifically requested. Was like, I will feel much safer if this doesn't happen. I'm like, okay, no problem. And then he has the audacity to tell me he is the one who broke this boundary just a few days before. I was like, I cannot. And in that moment, like, you know that when you have that fury washed over you like a red wave, I could see nothing. I was like a ball, you know. I was just like seeing red everywhere. I was like, I'm out. Like I tapped out. I was like, this is not enough. I need to go home. I need a break. So I'm packing my bag, and I see him, you know, like slouched over the bed, like his head in his hands. And I have this moment as if time paused, and I'm like, okay, he did the hard thing of revealing everything. Right? And I now had a choice. I was like, I get to walk out of here, and this relationship is over.
And it'll be my fault.
And it will be his fault. You know, no one will ever know that it wasn't entirely his fault. Or I get to do the thing that I've never done before and come entirely clean. I had a complicated relationship with truth in the past. It's taken me some way to go to realize that actually being honest is the better thing. And in that moment, I made the choice that I will also be...
Drum roll, please. Spoiler alert.
So I stand up, like the fury is gone entirely. Like I come up from behind him and I hug him and I'm like, I also have something to say. And the shock, the confusion on Vlad's face. Oh, it was hilarious. If it wasn't that I was about to drop a horrible bomb on him of like, hey, by the way, there was like, we had maybe 3 hard boundaries. You broke one, well, I broke another one a couple of weeks back. And it was hilarious. It was literally almost like a cartoon moment of his face lighting up and being like, oh my God, we're even. We're fine.
Well, in my head, I was like, well, I think she expects me to flip out. And I'm like, well, if I flip out, I validate her flipping out. So let me take the other route and be like, okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
One, like tit for tat, 1 for 1, flip the page. We start from scratch and we don't do this anymore. But that was really, really powerful. And again, this really ties into what we were sharing of, if you're doing this, like, leave everything, like, put your cards on the table. Like, genuinely bring everything that you have, because if you're leaving something unsaid in the back of your mind, you might as well not bother with all the emotional pain, because it's not going to work. And if you're really not showing up fully, then you're invalidating the whole container. So, if it comes up later, it'll be like, well, why did we bother with this? And so, yeah, that was really, really powerful. And as you said, cartoonish. Thankfully, we haven't had anything like that happen again. That was a momentous moment.
Yeah.
And then we had the most beautiful Sunday afterwards, really repairing. We ended up rolling back our relationship for the time being, because we called ourselves primary partners initially, and then we're like, let's roll back to normal partners. And then it took us a few months to work back to primary partnership, but from a much deeper place of recognition of this is truly what we want. For those of you non-poly, primary is kind of like the main, the hierarchically partner that you prioritize the most. Yeah, like that really felt like we were millimeters away from everything ending. And to this day, we're very grateful to kind of how it all unfolded, and that we did each have, well, it's really not an ace up your sleeve, but quite the opposite, but that it was 1 for 1, because if it was just one of us, it could have been honestly pretty deadly to our relationship.
Yeah.
But that really, that whole experience of that 1 week showed us that if we hadn't had these containers, we would not have been able to have these conversations. This truth wouldn't have come out. It would have just probably been an argument and an end to things.
Yeah.
And so we really like viscerally feel the need for it. And frankly, looking out there, I see how many people don't have that. And many people for years will carry little resentments, something left unsaid, and it might take an hour to really come clean and be like, hey, here's how I'm feeling. But there's no emotional safety. There's no feeling that a person will hold a space for you. And so, yeah, you just go on never really sharing that.
Yeah. And I'm not going to lie, I think it was seeing the benefit and seeing the importance and the key role that this container played in us resolving our issues that convinced me towards these container-based conversations. Because in the beginning, I kind of didn't really subscribe to this whole idea. I felt it was very processy. It was a little bit like scheduling sex, and I'm really, I'm like the person who's like, I love the spontaneous thing. Like if things are happening in the moment, that's when we deal with them. And I was wrong. I think I really was wrong. And first of all, because I think when the idea that when things come up in the moment is you need to be validated in the moment and deal with them right here and then is slightly misled, because in the moment you might not actually have the perspective or the space. You might be really taken by all the emotions running high and all your patterns are kicking in, yeah, it's really not necessarily the best way to deal with them.
Or the other person might not be ready to receive. They're like in their own thing, tired, they have no idea what's coming, and then we drop it on them without warning, right? And just to kind of back what you were just saying in terms of us getting convinced, if you're in a relationship and you don't have these containers, really don't do what we did, which is wait for really shit to hit the fan before introducing them. Because what's happened in our relationship is we now look forward to these container conversations because they create so much reconnection and so much safety and so much trust, that we're like, oh, every time we have these, we're going to end up repairing, resolving, and being closer to each other. So it's like, bring it on. Let's address this really difficult thing. And I actually we have a close friend who really introduced that concept into my life, where he was like, I love the hard conversations, like, give more to me. And I was like, this is insane. And now I really back that, because every time you have a hard conversation, if both of you are coming from the right space to it, it will most likely result in repair, or at least you will understand each other better, even if you decide that you're not compatible. But it'll come from a place of understanding and honesty and really looking at things truthfully, not kind of the outer voices, in your head, kind of yapping about.
Yeah. That being said, though, there is one more thing that we just wanted to highlight, which is not everything needs a container-based conversation. I think in the beginning we got really excited. We're like, okay, we're gonna hold all these containers, but I mean, like if you have a little annoyance, it's also about just resolving things in the moment. And when it's not anything too big, too explosive, too heavy, I think it's very important to have that constant ongoing communication and feedback. But this really is a space for, resolving something that maybe really, it needs a space to be handled.
Yeah. And maybe as we're kind of wrapping things up, a couple of more things. One is, to add to the concern that you have around like the scheduling and kind of the feeling that, oh, why are we not addressing this now? It actually, really what we've discovered is that having these containers creates a lot more respect and feeling that our truth is being honored, because we both have time and we've both committed to talk about this. And it's not this kind of, oh, let's squeeze in the hard conversation between all the things that we need to do. But it's like, no, this is important. Your feelings are important to me, so I'm going to make time for it. And I know it's going to be a heavy Thursday night, but it's worth it. And then I think the other thing is that they allow you to flag things early, right? And not wait until things are really blowing up, but being like, hey, this feels really important and I don't want to wait until it's kind of if we don't have this conversation, we're done. And because of that, again, it feels more respectful, because it's like this connection matters enough that I'm going to flag this. And I think as we've progressed in our relationship, we've had to have fewer and fewer of these. We've never had another weak container. Right now, it is honestly, even an hour is quite long for our kind of containers. A lot of times it's a bit shorter because we've just gotten so used to this setup. It's really easy for us to bring it up. It's easy for us to check in with ourselves whether now is a good time. And then we get to the resolution a lot faster. And so now it feels a lot more smooth, and it doesn't need this kind of, oh my God, this is going to be heavy. Yeah. And maybe the final point is, not all containers need to be for romantic relationships. You can have this with your colleagues. You can have this with your friends. You can have this with your family and your parents. I've recently had a conversation with my mom where I was like, hey, it would be really nice to address certain things that happened in my childhood as a container. And it's a really beautiful tool for communication. And once you test it out in one relationship and see the value, it's very possible that you'll start trying to introduce it to other relationships.
Yeah. But also, I think I just wanted to add on top of that is, a container conversation doesn't only need to be about conflict resolution relating to that relationship, right? So it's a space where you can bring other topics as well. If there is an issue that you have at work, or there is an issue in another, I don't know, relationship that you have, but you're just processing something and you want your partner to really be emotionally present for that, you can be like, hey, can I just ask you for a bit of a container? Can you really center your attention on me and on this specific topic that I have in mind? And then maybe, there is less emotional triggers. It doesn't need to be as handled as a conversation about a conflict within your relationship, but the concept itself remains, it's just dedicated time and space to a specific topic that you show up to with emotional availability.
We would love to hear from you if you learn something from this and you implement it, or if you already use containers, or if we missed anything. And we really hope that maybe at least for one of you, this will improve a relationship or save a relationship, or just create more safety and understanding in relating to other people. So hopefully these were useful. We're also contemplating whether to make a little cheat sheet. So if you're interested, send us a DM on Instagram. And if enough of you want that, then maybe we'll put something together.
Cool. Thank you very much for listening.
See you in the next one.